How do you know what your values are? Hi there, and welcome back to Ask Dr. Syra, the show where I answer your questions about personal growth, mental health, and relationships. So today's question comes from Arslan, and Arslan asks, how do you know what your values are? How do you know what your values are? Well, first of all, what do we mean when we say the word values? To keep it really simple, our values are the things that are important to us, the qualities of being that are essential and important to us. So, one of the ways to answer the question is something like, what's the most important? What are the 5 top things you look for in friendship? For example, that would be a way to answer the question. If you're always thinking about making a friend, what are some of the qualities that I'd like to see in that friend? Because usually we're looking for people who are similar to us, right? And so if you ask me that question, I might say something like, okay, my top 5 are wanting to connect, humor, honesty, um, being kind of inclusive, and I don't know, what's another one? Fun, I guess, would be a good one. And so that's kind of what I would want in a friend. So what that tells me is that those are things I value. I value fun and humor. I value closeness. I value um, being there for people and being inclusive. So that's one way to kind of figure out what are my values. So values are, again, what are the qualities of being that are important to me? That are important to me. Now, where do we get our values from? We get our values from a lot of different places. Usually, our values are first formed in our families of origin. So the families that we grew up in, they'll have a certain set of values. So an example would be like, say if in your family, you had dinner together every night, for example, right? So now what's the value behind that? Might be family unity, right? That might be a value that underpins the behavior of a dinner together. And it might not be something you've ever really thought about, but when you think back, like, oh yeah, that's what that was about, right? Maybe one of the things around that family dinner was that you would talk. Everybody would like tell a little bit about their day and talk about their problems or whatever. Maybe not. So if that was part of it, then maybe part of the family value was transparency, right? Being honest and open with each other. Not all families have that value. Not all families practice in that way. But you would have learned particular values in the system that you grew up in. So that's where it starts. And then we go to school. So the places that we're learning, the cities that we live in or the country that we live in. If we belong to a faith tradition, then maybe the faith tradition has particular values that you learn. So we pick them up over time, right? And it's because values are so, like, they're kind of like the water we swim in. We don't really think about them much until one of our values gets challenged or threatened. That's when we become aware that it's a value. So for example, trust is a value that many people find important in a relationship, for example, like a intimate partnership. Don't really think too much about trust until trust is broken. And then we think a lot about trust and can I trust this person? If you're thinking a lot about trust and trust has never been broken in the relationship, then it's because you're bringing that in from another relationship, right? Somewhere else in your life, trust has been broken. And so you're assuming you still value trust, but you have some challenges around it. And that's why it's up in your face. So usually our values aren't apparent to us unless we're working through something and actually paying particular attention to it. Then we'll become aware that it's a value. So if values are kind of like, the water that we swim in, how do we actually figure out our values? How do we figure that out? One of the ways to answer the question is to think about, what is it that I admire in other people? What is it that I see as something I'd like to emulate, something I'd like to be like? And so I might not feel like I am that yet, but I see it in others. So one thing might be, for example, generosity. I see other people's generosity and I'm so inspired. And so that tells me that generosity is probably something that I value as well. I might not be as aware of it because I'm swimming in it, but it's probably something I value. So that's one way, is to ask yourself, what qualities in other people do you admire and want to emulate? If none of these are working, or you've done this and you have like a laundry list of like 85 values that are there. I I stumbled across this personal values assessment quiz online, and it's, you know, I'm not affiliated with them. I'm not connected to their organization, but I find that their quiz is actually quite fun. So what you do is you go in there and they ask you like, you know, list your, like, there's a bunch of categories and you click like the values that are important to you, and then it'll give you like this or that. So it'll say something like what's more important, freedom or honesty, and like you have to pick one from the two. So based on what you select, then they're going to kind of narrow it down for you and give you your top 5, which is fascinating. When I did that assessment, then I got my top 5 values, and then I kind of had a template or a roadmap to make decisions, right? Because then in decision making, I could say, oh, one of my values is, what was one of my, I can't even remember what they were. Yeah, one of my values is health and well-being. And so if health and well-being, if I say that one of my top 5 values is health and well-being, is this particular choice moving me closer to that value or further away from that value? Okay, so we can actually use that structure to then make it easier for us to make difficult decisions because you have a framework. Again, most people don't usually think about the framework, and so it's influencing your decision making anyway. But when you can bring it to consciousness, you feel more control. You feel like you're more in control and you're actually making choices and deliberate movement towards the life that you're trying to build. So that's what I would say about that. How do you know your values? It's kind of a complicated process because you kind of have to do some digging. And then if that digging is just too hard, there's lots of tools online that you can go and like click and figure it out. But one of the ways to ask is, okay, what do I see as valuable in other people? What do I want to emulate? And you'll get some clues around that. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have a question, I'd love to hear it. Send me an email, and make sure to like and subscribe, so I get like YouTube points or whatever. I don't even know what happens, but like and subscribe, and then you'll get notifications, I think, whenever I put out a new video. All right, see you next time. Bye.